I want to talk about Jackson and the Bank of the United States. Let me give you an example for a moment of a bad loan. Let me give you an example of a bad loan. Don't write. You'll immediately see what a bad idea this is. My name is Richard Clayman. Remember me? I live in a shoe. I have 7 children. I work at Stop and Shop. I make $6 an hour. I just decided I was going to go and do something I've always wanted to do. I've decided to go out and buy a new 7 Series BMW that costs $94,000. Now, I make $6 an hour, and I just bought a car that costs $94,000. This is not going to work, is it? Because I obviously cannot afford this car. But I did this because I wanted to make myself feel good and because I was a little demented. But not only was I a little demented, who was really demented? Put your hand up. Who was really demented? The bank. The bank that lent me that money really made a big mistake. Do banks often do this? By the way, why would the bank, are you listening? Why would the bank give me that kind of a loan? Because in actuality, they might give me that kind of a loan because maybe I could make the payment for 3 months, but after 3 months, they would repossess the car and sell it to somebody else. That would be their hope, that they could do that. Do you get the idea? So, evidenced by the banking chaos that we have in the United States today, we can see that banks often make very great mistakes, don't they? Right? Banks can often create. And what if they gave me that loan and they gave all of you the exact same loan? That would be really a problem, wouldn't it? Okay, good. Write this down. Here we go. In 1832, for political reasons that we don't have to get into, Andrew Jackson decided not to recharter the Bank of the United States. In 1832, Andrew Jackson made a decision, and the decision was to veto the charter for the Bank of the United States. The bank had been rechartered in 1816. It had gotten a 20-year charter. So in actuality, its charter was not really up until 1836. The charter of the bank was not up, always with the hands. The charter of the bank was not up. It had a license to operate. A charter only means that it could operate, okay? So officially, the bank could have been in operation until 1836. But for political reasons that we don't have to get into, the Bank of the United States decided to ask for an early charter in 1832. Jackson decided to veto the Bank of the United States. I need your help a little bit. Why does Jackson decide to veto the bank? What is it about the bank? What does the Bank of the United States do? And what was it that Jackson didn't like? Go ahead, Mohammed. What does the Bank of the United States do? You're not answering my question with enough specificity. What does the Bank of the United States do?
It does wealthy investments for corrupt politicians.
You're not answering my question objectively. Go ahead. What does the Bank of the United States? Stay awake. What does the bank do?
The bank loans money, but it makes money for foreign interests.
You're not answering my question. What does the Bank of the United States do? What's its function? Come on.
Give money to the rich.
The Bank of the United States was a regulatory institution. The Bank of the United States was a central bank that regulated the economic activities of smaller banks so that smaller banks would not make irresponsible loans, like the loan they gave me to buy the car. Write that down. The Bank of the United States acted as a regulatory institution. This is not difficult. The Bank of the United States acts as a regulatory bank. It is a large bank, and it controls the activities of smaller banks so that the smaller banks act responsibly. Write that down. The Bank of the United States, good thick notes. The Bank of the United States is a regulatory institution. It regulates smaller banks so that these small banks do not make irresponsible loans. That's what the Bank of the United States, at this time, that was its function. Continue. In truth, the Bank of the United States tended to represent people and institutions that very much believed in sound or hard money. The Bank of the United States was an institution that represented sound or hard money. All that means is this. If I borrow from you $5,000, if I pay you back in a week, that's not a bad deal. You get your $5,000 back. What happens if I pay you back in 10 years? You get screwed, don't you? Because $5,000 in 10 years is going to be worth a lot less than $5,000 today. Isn't that true? The Bank of the United States wanted to be paid back quickly. They believed in hard money. They wanted money to be hard. They believed in the gold standard. They were wealthy. The Bank of the United States, as you point out, did represent people who were wealthy people. That's true. Banks normally represent wealthy people, don't they? Banks normally have money. So the Bank of the United States was an institution that oversaw, that regulated the economy, that regulated small banks in particular, in an attempt to make sure that the economy was sound. Why does Jackson veto the bank? Why does Jackson veto the bank? Help me. Did you read this material? He does not favor paper money. Why does Jackson veto the Bank of the United States? Shocking. Shocking because you haven't read. Go ahead. Help me. Don't disappoint me. Why does he veto the Bank of the United States?
Because Jackson really was a president for the working people.
Stop there. He's saying some good things. Write this down. Point number one. Jackson sympathized, as the gentleman says, with working people. We can use that terminology. With working people, and he wanted to provide easy credit for working people so that they could realize their dreams. Write that down. The gentleman makes a good point. Jackson sympathized with working people, and he wanted, because he sympathized, good thick notes, because he sympathized with working people, he wanted banks to have a lending policy that was free, elastic, accessible, and not too rigid. Because very often, don't working people not necessarily have the right collateral, or they don't have the right history, or they don't have the right background to warrant a loan? Working people are at a disadvantage normally in getting a loan because loaning institutions are looking for you to have more cash than you probably have. So Jackson vetoes the bank. He vetoes this regulatory institution because he wants to he's sympathetic. Are you listening? He's sympathetic with working people, and he wants banking policy to be more elastic. Write that down. He wants banking policy to be more elastic. Why else does he veto this bank? Go ahead.
Does he not? It's because he doesn't like the connection between the banks and the politicians? How it's made?
Jackson, point number 2. Jackson believed that his arch enemy, Henry Clay, was responsible for forcing this issue to emerge in 1832. Jackson believed that Henry Clay was forcing the issue regarding the chartering of the bank. That Henry Clay was forcing that issue. And Jackson very much resented, as you understand, as we said the other day, Jackson would very much resent any kind of action that he thought was directed at him from a personal or a political point of view. And as you know, he's very hostile to Henry Clay. Write in your notes. Why is he hostile to Clay? Write this down. Why was he hostile to Clay? Why is he hostile to Clay? Write this down. Listen. Henry Clay wanted the American economy. Henry Clay wanted the American economy to be an integrated economy. He wanted the economy to be an integrated economy. I'm going to explain what that means, okay? He wanted the economy to be an integrated economy with the United States government spending money in order to integrate that economy. Henry Clay wanted the United States government to spend money to fully integrate the American economy. Henry Clay, a Republican, favored these ideas. He wanted there to be a strong bank he wanted there to be a Bank of the United States. Clay, write this down. Clay believed in the Bank of the United States. He believed that the United States should encourage manufacturing. Good thick notes. He believed that the United States should encourage manufacturing. He wanted there to be a strong bank. He wanted the United States government to sponsor manufacturing, to encourage people to manufacture. He wanted the money that the United States made, that the United States government earned, to be spent on roads, bridges, canals, and other transportation mechanisms. Stay awake. He wanted the United States government's money to be spent on what we call infrastructure. He wanted the government's money to be spent on roads and bridges and canals. Can you see why? So that the manufactured products, so that the products that were manufactured could be sold everywhere. The products that would be manufactured in New York City could be sold everywhere if you had the right infrastructure system. Isn't this always the problem? Who pays the bills? Isn't that one of the great philosophical questions of our day? Who picks up the check? Henry Clay believed that the country would never be a great country unless the country had manufacturing, unless money meant something, and unless there was an infrastructure system so that everything could be sold everywhere. Henry Clay's vision of America is the vision that you're very familiar with, right? In other words, we realize no matter where we go, there's the roads, there's the highways, there's the gas stations, there's the malls, there's the stores. We live in an integrated economy. Henry Clay thought that this was the direction to go in the 1820s. He was ahead of his time in that regard. What about Jackson? Write this down. What was Jackson's take on this? In other words, what was Jackson's vision If Henry Clay was ahead of his time, what's the deal with Jackson? Well, write this down. Jackson was very suspicious of the idea that the central government should have such responsibilities. Jackson was very suspicious of the idea that the United States government should have these kinds of responsibilities. In a lot of ways, Jackson, as the gentleman mentioned earlier, Jackson looked at a smaller, a more local America than he did a national America. Get that down. Jackson looks at America as a more local place. Jackson believes that the states and local areas ought to be more responsible for economic development. Jackson is very suspicious of the idea that the federal government should have such overarching responsibilities. Jackson has a very local picture for what America should look like. Henry Clay's picture is broader and more dynamic. Okay? So these are the essential ideas that Henry Clay represented, and you know from your reading that these ideas are identified as the American system. Write that down. Henry Clay's ideas are identified as the American system. Okay? The American system. To create an integrated economy. I didn't answer one idea that I mentioned, and that is, where's the United States going to get the money? If the United States is going to integrate the economy, if the United States is going to spend money on roads and bridges and canals, where's the United States going to get the money in order to make this happen? I'm worried, Mohammed, but go ahead. No. Where is the United States going to get the money? Here's why we do the reading. Do you follow me? This is why we do the reading, so we're a step ahead of it, so we get it. Go ahead.
Sell out bonds?
We're not into bonds. Go ahead.
They decided to make paper money?
Well, not exactly. Not exactly. This whole thing about money, listen, ladies and gentlemen, America was chaotic in regards to money. There were some people who only believed in gold and silver. There were banks that issued their own currencies. States issued their own currencies. Money was chaotic. That's why there was a Bank of the United States that tried to have some order. Do you get the idea? Back to my question. Where is the United States going to get the money? Go ahead.
From the people.
You're not, what's that?
To tax it from the people.
Not exactly. Go ahead.
From the market economy by them specializing.
You're not answering me with enough specificity. Go ahead.
They would put taxes on the bridges after they made them.
Yes, but that's not for the federal government. The reading. We always get back to the reading. We always have to come back to the reading. The United States would get the money in great part from having a high tariff. Write this down. There would be a high tariff, a tax on imported goods. The United States, the tariff would be a moneymaker. The tariff would be a moneymaker for the United States government. And so the Congress would pass the tariff of 1832. The Congress would pass the tariff of 1832. This was a tax. A tariff is a tax on imported goods. A tariff is a tax on imported goods. This tariff of 1832 was a high tariff. This was a high tariff. Jackson did not believe in high tariffs. Write this down. Jackson did not believe in high tariffs. He didn't believe in high tariffs But for a variety of reasons, he accepted the idea that this tariff was necessary. Jackson didn't believe in high tariffs, but for a variety of reasons, he accepted this tariff. Don't write. The South tended to be opposed, especially opposed to high tariffs. Write that down. The South tended to be especially opposed to high tariffs. The South was not in favor of high tariffs. Okay? Don't write, just listen. The South is not in favor of high tariffs. Does anybody want to answer why that might be? Are you thinking? Why would the South not be in favor of it?
Because all the money they'd be paying on slaves coming over.
No, that's been already resolved. We're not there. Go ahead.
Because they're more of a farm, and then the North is more of an industrial.
You're not answering my question with enough specificity. The South favored a low tariff because, don't write, the South is growing cotton. They're sending a portion of this cotton to Great Britain. If we have a high tariff, that would force Great Britain to have a high tariff, and there could be a tariff war, and the South would be ill-treated in such a war. Also, we know something else. The South has a lot of people who have money, who are buying imported goods. They don't want a high tariff because everything they buy, they feel, would be more expensive with a high tariff. So the South is not in favor of a high tariff. Jackson is basically a Southerner. He's not in favor of a high tariff, but because he's a politician, Jackson signs the tariff bill of 1832. Don't write. John Calhoun from South Carolina informs the country that he will not obey the tariff of 1832. And not only that, listen, Calhoun says he will advise his state of South Carolina not to obey that law. Is this a problem? Are you listening? Is this a problem? Do you want to tell Jackson you won't obey a national law, knowing that Jackson is a little crazy? Jackson says to Calhoun, if you do not obey that law, I personally will come to South Carolina and personally hang you. You get the idea? Write this down. Although Jackson was not in favor of a high tariff, Jackson very much loved the country. Jackson was a lover of the country. Jackson is what we would call a political nationalist. The country comes first. Get the idea? To Jackson, the country comes first. So Jackson rejected the arguments of John Calhoun because Jackson realized that federal law deserved to be supreme. And if that's the law, that should be the law for everyone. Get that down. Jackson believed that federal law was supreme. There are some contradictions to this, but he brought forth some of these contradictions himself. But Jackson was a lover of the country, and he was going to protect the tariff of 1832, even though he was not really in favor of tariffs. Stop the music. The country could have broken up on the question of the tariff. The country could have dissolved on the question of the tariff. That issue was big enough to break up the country. Jackson would never allow himself to be president and to witness the breakup of the United States. That's not Jackson. You realize that, don't you? You realize that Jackson is a very emotional man. Jackson is a very partisan person. Jackson, as president, takes his position quite seriously. Jackson would not have the United States destroyed. He would never accept that. Is that clear? And the issue of the tariff brings that question out. As you know, Clay wants a high tariff because Clay wants the revenue from that tariff to build the roads, the bridges, the canals, and the other infrastructure that the country needed. Get the idea? Clay's policies, again, don't write. Clay's policies, a high protective tariff, a belief in the Bank of the United States, support for manufacturing, an integrated economy. Something is left unsaid. Something's left unsaid. This would be Jackson's criticism. This would be Jackson's criticism of Clay. Jackson would say to Clay, you favor the rich. You favor the rich. Because the rich will benefit from all of that. They will benefit first. They will benefit the most, the rich. Jackson says, I'm not for the rich. I'm for a different America. Get it? Now, so when Jackson vetoes the Bank of the United States, when he destroys the bank, Jackson, in a sense, sending a message, isn't he? Who's he sending a message to? The rich. He would be sending it to the Republicans too, because as you know, Jackson's a Democrat. Do you get the idea? So when Jackson destroys the Bank of the United States, he's sending a message that he is not going to advance the interest of the rich. Stop there. Questions? Questions? Come on, are you thinking? Questions? Professor, I have a question. Is Jackson motivated by ideology, or does Jackson just hate Henry Clay? Does Jackson do stuff because he hates people? He does, doesn't he? Jackson's very personal. Jackson takes politics very personally. Don't write. There was a road to be built from Cumberland, Maryland, to Wheeling, what it would be Wheeling, Virginia, now Wheeling, West Virginia. It's called the Cumberland Road. It was called the National Road from Cumberland, Maryland to Wheeling, Virginia. Jackson vetoes the Cumberland Road. He won't pay for it. Why does he veto it? Well, he says he vetoes it because most of the road runs through the state of Kentucky. Who lives in Kentucky? Who? Jackson's from Tennessee. Henry Clay. Jackson vetoes the Cumberland Road, not because it's not a good project. It was a very good project. But Jackson hates Henry Clay. We don't admire that very much, do we? But that was the reality. Continue. When money is taken out of the Bank of the United States, when the money is taken out of the Bank of the United States, when money is taken out of the Bank of the United States, Jackson has the federal money distributed. Jackson takes the federal money out of the Bank of the United States, and he has it distributed to Democratic-controlled banks throughout the country. He takes the money and he sprinkles the money to Democratic-controlled banks, to small banks throughout the country. Do you see a problem here? Do you see a problem? Do you see a problem? You got to think, okay? Jackson takes the federal money out of the Bank of the United States, and he breaks it up, and he gives it, he provides it to many, 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 many small banks. What's the problem? Go ahead.
Like you said, it was
Louder.
the Bank of America was regulatory, and then you passed it on to all.
So now there is no regulatory institution. Now that there is no bank, there's nobody watching the chicken coop. Nobody's watching. Uh-oh, nobody's watching small banks. How do banks make money? By making loans. Good loans, bad loans, as long as they make a lot of loans. So now these banks, hi, my name is Richard Claim, and I have a bank, the Bank of Malden. I have $7 million in the bank. Jackson just gave me $12 million. Now I've got $19 million. When I had $7 million, I loaned crazy. Now that I got $19 million, watch me really loan crazy. You want to see a madman at work? Watch me. I'm going to make, you need 2 BMWs? I'll get you 2 BMWs. I'll make all kinds of crazy loans. And write this down. And there is an economic expansion that takes place. A boom. There's a boom. There's a boom that takes place. There's a boom that takes place because of all the easy loans that are made. Does this sound like the mortgage crisis in the United States? When everybody was, getting easy money to buy a house and then taking money out of the house in order to buy a car and buy another house or to flip it. You know that word, let's flip it? That became a word, wasn't it? Let's flip it. We'll buy it, we'll flip it. How long shall we own it for? I don't know, 12 seconds. Long enough. We'll sell it. Hello, I bought it, I want to sell it now. And every time we sell it, we'll make more. So it was said. Jackson's money into small banks creates a boom so that people are buying land and buying a variety of other opportunities that they believe in. In 1836, when Jackson leaves office, the boom will turn into a depression. From 1832 to 1836, there will be a boom. But in 1836, shut that off. In 1836, there will be the price to be paid. There'll be an enormous depression. And this depression, in effect, will continue, write this down, from 1837 almost to about 1844. From 1837 to 1844, good thick notes, there will be a depression. Did Jackson do good by destroying the Bank of the United States? Well, it's a mix. You'll forgive me for asking this question, won't you? What does Hofstadter say? Write that down. How does Hofstadter assess, write this down. How does Hofstadter assess Jackson? How does Hofstadter assess Jackson? How does Hofstadter assess Jackson? In a lot of ways, Hofstadter is very sympathetic to Jackson. It would be easy to say that Jackson created an economic catastrophe. It would be easy to say that Jackson created an economic catastrophe because in many ways he did. There was chaos. There was chaos as a result of there was chaos when the Bank of the United States wasn't in operation. That's absolutely true. There was economic chaos. But something else happened, too. What else happened? Have you read this yet? You have to, okay? You have to. What else? Go ahead. Nice and loud.
There was more opportunities for people and less of a divide.
Stop there. She said something good, didn't she? There was economic chaos, that's true. But people's dreams were somewhat realized, at least for a short period of time. By the way, is it important to have your dreams somewhat realized? It is, isn't it? Recognizing that so many of our dreams go nowhere. That's why we need continual new dreams, because the old dreams don't work out. Get the idea? And so, to give Jackson credit, yeah, okay, Jackson killed the Bank of the United States, created an inflationary spiral that led to a depression, but some people, for a short period of time, bought the farm that they wanted to buy, got involved in some enterprise that they wanted to get involved in. Maybe ultimately it failed, but they got a chance. Jackson represented the idea of giving people a chance. Is that a significant theme in America? Giving people a chance? That's a big deal, isn't it? That's what we believe to be America about, giving people a chance. How many of you have a dream of owning your own home? How many of you would like to own 2 houses? A summer house. How about a summer house? Winter house, summer house. Hey, it's America. You can dream, can't you? You can dream. What else does Hofstadter say? Go ahead.
His actions,
Louder, Jessica.
his actions serve as a model for later decisions in smaller issues.
Okay, she's saying something good. Continue. Jackson represented the idea that other presidents could and should be sensitive to the needs of common people. Jackson represented the idea that other presidents could and should be sensitive to the needs of common people. Hofstadter makes that case. Hofstadter talks about one other idea. Get this down. Hofstadter spends a lot of time discussing a legal case called the Charles River Bridge case. The Charles River Bridge case. Hold on a second. This is the week to read Hofstadter, isn't it? Now you're prepared to read Hofstadter, but this is the week to read Hofstadter. You follow me? Jessica, tell me about the Charles River Bridge case.
They built the Charles River Bridge.
There's a bridge across. Are you listening? There's a bridge connecting Boston to Cambridge. Stay awake. There's one bridge. Go ahead.
And, I'm sorry, so I believe that is privately built?
It is a person got a charter, got permission to build the bridge, and the bridge is privately owned. So that if somebody wants to cross the bridge, they have to pay a toll to the person who owns the bridge. Continue.
And the government wants to build another.
Hold on, not exactly. Go ahead. Now,
Harvard University built the first.
we're not talking about that.
Legislator wanted federal money to build the Warren Ave Bridge, and Harvard University took them to court, went to Supreme Court to prevent them from building the bridge.
Somebody else wants to build another bridge, whoever the party was. Somebody else wants to build the bridge, okay? Somebody else wants to build the bridge. Go ahead.
But the bridge that's already built is freaking out because then they're going to lose money. So then they're
Stop. That's the problem. The original owner of the bridge says, look, we have a charter. We have the authority to build this bridge. Our charter gives us, in a sense, a monopoly for people to use the bridge. The court rules, Jackson's appointee to the court, Chief Justice Taney, makes the case, you have a charter, but you don't have a monopoly. Another bridge can be built. And if another bridge is built, that means that it doesn't deny your right to have a bridge, but it implies that there now will be competition in crossing the Charles River. Write this down. The Charles River Bridge case, points out Jackson favored expanding economic opportunity. Jackson favored expanding economic opportunity. He didn't feel that it served the country if economic interests were monopolized. He didn't feel that he wanted to expand opportunity. He didn't feel the country would be well served if there were monopolies, so to speak. Do you get the idea? So on the one hand, the charter that the Charles River Bridge Company had was still valid, but it didn't mean that they could totally dominate. Hofstadter uses this case as an illustration. Write this down. Hofstadter uses this case as an illustration for what he calls the expansion of liberal capitalism. Hofstadter uses this case to argue for what he calls Jackson was a representative of liberal capitalism, spending money that expanded economic opportunity. Okay, are you there? Don't write. Jackson was a very untypical individual to be president. Being a very untypical individual, he expanded the opportunities for people. He expanded the opportunities that people had to buy land, to vote, and to participate in the society. He was interested in doing, are you listening? He's interested in doing this because he believed that wealthy people should not dominate a society. By the way, isn't that a theme? Isn't that a theme that is a persistent theme in American life? The struggle between the rich and the poor. There's one other struggle that Jackson kind of pushes to the side, though, isn't there? What's that struggle? We mentioned it the other day.
Slavery?
The issue of slavery is pushed aside. Write that down. The issue of slavery is pushed aside. Slavery is an idea that Jackson has no quarrel with. Jackson is a plantation owner. He has no quarrel with slavery. Jackson has no quarrel with slavery. Okay? Questions from you? Are you there? Questions from you on Jackson? Go ahead. Nice and loud. Loud.
Do you think he pushes slavery aside to remain neutral?
No. He pushes slavery aside because he believes in slavery. He doesn't think that slavery interferes with the country. Jackson looks at America as a white man's country. Jackson is a complete racist, total and complete racist. He believes that America is a white man's country. He does not see a multiracial society. He does not see equality between the races. This is not Jackson's vision. Professor, I have a question. If Jackson was a racist, what about the vast majority of people who supported Jackson? Overwhelmingly, they would be racist. Overwhelmingly, the sentiment in the country among white people was that this was a white man's country. Even among certain intellectuals. Were there some people who took a different position? Yes. Those people that we call abolitionists, Garrison and the Liberator, the newspaper in Boston, they did not take that position, but they were very, very much in the minority. They would be the minority. 1, 2, go ahead.
Even though they hated each other, did Henry Clay ever bring up into the House of Representatives to bring the slavery issue back into main focus?
He's making a very good point. He's raising a very important question. Write this down. What was Henry Clay's position on slavery? What was Henry Clay's position on slavery? Here is with, again, the reading. That chapter 10 in Birkin. If you're not married, marry this, okay? Clay also was a slave owner. Clay was a slave owner. But Clay believed that slavery was not in the best economic interest of the country. Clay believed that slavery was a problem, was a flaw, brought on economic divisiveness, divided the country. He had no real solution to deal with slavery, with one exception. He came up with one idea, not a great idea, but he came up with one idea in order to deal with slavery. Clay was a proponent of what was called the recolonization movement, the recolonization of Africans back to Africa. Clay believed that might be the only solution to deal with the slave issue. Clay was hostile to, when I say he was hostile to the idea of slavery, even though he was a slave owner. But Clay saw no possibility in dealing with the slave issue. You see, ladies and gentlemen, listen, don't write. When I say he saw no possibility, very few white people believed that black people and white people could coexist on any basis of equality. Very few white people had such a vision. And if they did have such a vision, they would be seen as abolitionists or very radical people. Very few people had such a vision. Most white people were poor, working people. They were poor. And as a result, they often looked at slavery as competition to them. And as a result, they were not sympathetic to the condition or plight of blacks. They were not sympathetic at all. Why might they not be sympathetic? In addition to the point that I just mentioned, that they may be seen as competitive. Go ahead.
Slaves got regular meals.
No, you're not exactly. Go ahead. Why might they not be sympathetic? You have to think like a fox, not a pussycat. Demography has the answer. Demography. Uh-oh. What the hell does that mean? Yes, you know what that means. Demography, where people are located. Overwhelmingly, most blacks lived in the South. In 1850, just to give you a statistic, in 1850, there will be what? There will be about 4 million black slaves. There will be maybe 400,000 free blacks. The point is, if my name is Richard Clayman and I'm a white guy living in Boston, I am going to have very little exposure to blacks, even free blacks. There will be a small free black population, but I will have almost no exposure to the everyday life of slavery. I am thoroughly ignorant about slavery. So my point would be then, most white people, besides being fearful of competing against slavery, were ignorant about how horrible slavery was. Do you get the idea? So white people tended to be very indifferent to the question of slavery. Do you follow me? Do you get that, Nancy? They were too separated. White people did not really understand what slavery was about, aside from the fact that white people were very prejudiced and very fearful and very difficult and had a difficult time in sustaining themselves to begin with. So it will come as no surprise, for example, when the Irish come to the United States. In the 1840s, there will be great hostility between the Irish and free black populations in New York or Boston or elsewhere. Why? Because there is this inevitable competition. Don't forget, most white people, to use a term we discussed before, are not highly capitalized. Most white, my name is Richard Clayman, I live in a shoe, I have 7 children, remember me? I am one big nothing. I am one big no one. I have hopes, I have dreams, but I have no money. It should come as no surprise to you that I am full of prejudice. Prejudice is what keeps me alive. Prejudice is what gives me my sense of identity. There's someone below me. Do you understand my mind? Do you understand my mind? Can you understand how my prejudice affects my mind? That would be me. I wrote an essay last year about the very, very famous Nathaniel Hawthorne, the great American writer from Salem, Massachusetts, who is clearly one of the great American writers who talk about love, death, the psyche, the whole deal. Hawthorne was very, very hostile to blacks. Ironic that such an intellectual was hostile to blacks, since increasingly many of the intellectuals coming out of Boston would identify with Garrison and the legacy of Garrison and adopt a more abolitionist mentality. That would happen in time, but in the 1830s and 1840s, that would not happen. Jackson represents the white politician who looks at America as a white man's country and is interested in issues having to do with white people. And he is able to push the issue of slavery out of view because he had so much passion. Did he keep the country together in the Tariff of 1832? Did he destroy the dragon of the Bank of the United States? Was he interested in white common people? Did he believe in opportunity for common people? Did he want to expand economic opportunity for common white people? Was he a hero? This was not good for blacks. Ironic, isn't it? What about Jackson and Native Americans? What about Jackson and Native Americans? Every question from me isn't a challenge. Every question from me has to do with your reading. What about Jackson and Native Americans? Go ahead.
He was famous being pushing Indian creeks.
For moving Native Americans off of land so that white people could take the land of Native Americans in Georgia and moving them to Oklahoma. But what does Jackson do in regard to Native Americans? This is right up your alley. Go ahead.
I think he marries an Indian woman.
No, he doesn't. Go ahead.
He adopts a Cherokee child?
He and his wife adopt a Native American child. He adopts a child. So for an individual identified as being hostile to Native Americans, this is the odd thing about Jackson's heart. Jackson's heart is a very odd quantity. Jackson's identified as an Indian killer. Jackson's identified as being hostile, shut that off, of being hostile to Native Americans. But in actuality, the human condition, Jackson's always sympathetic to the human condition. I saw a hand. Young lady. Okay. Loud. Uh-oh. 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 Interesting, isn't it? Does she make a good point? Does she make a good point? She's making a very psychological point having to do with an issue that we would call, from a psychological point of view, transference. Transference. You know what transference means. You know, you people with lots of chips on your shoulders? You know what I mean? Transference is when one problem becomes another problem. Just as she said, going back to Jackson's mother, going back to Jackson's wife, going back to Jackson's sympathy and empathy towards females, Jackson always returns to the issue of his own vulnerability in regards to women. And I think you're quite right. We would really have to go back to his mother, wouldn't we? Go ahead.
I was going to ask,
Yep.
how did he feel about immigrants?
Jackson was not hostile to immigrants, since most of the immigrants coming to the United States in his period of time were basically people like himself. This was America was not diverse in regards to its ethnic or immigrant origins. Most people are coming from Western Europe. They are overwhelmingly Protestant. There are some Catholics. There are some very few Jews too. But overwhelmingly, it remains a Protestant society. Jackson and natives then? Take a look at the case. What is it? Worcester versus Georgia. Make a note of this. The case Worcester versus Georgia. Take a look at the Supreme Court case Worcester versus Georgia. Worcester versus Georgia. Thank you very much.